What I want to do is to bring a focus on where we're going. This is the year 2001. 2001 is the first year of the 21st century. I know we all play the game that it was 2000. But there was no year zero. Do you understand? There was no year zero that I know of. They could, by the way, they could have done that. They could have had a year zero, but they didn't have a year zero. So 2000 actually is the last year of the 20th century, and now we are in the first year of the 21st century. The only person who recognized that was Fidel Castro, who postponed the celebration of the 21st century. Was it Afsalachas? So January the 1st, 2001. I want you to imagine something, because it's very hard for us to understand what it means to be at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. Try to imagine a world in which there was no automobile, a world in which there was no airplane, a world in which there was no radio or TV, no telephone, no cellular telephone. Some people would not try to imagine a world in which there was no computer, or a world in which there was no plumbing or flush toilet. A world in which there was no running water coming out of, out of faucets, and a world in which there was no electric power. Have you ever been caught without power?
Yes.
What happens to your? What happens to our life is you need a shrink. I mean, everything collapses. We are the children of the 20th century. We live in this technological culture which determines how we live and to some degree how we think, because all of these wonders are a function of a revolution that's been going on for at least 3 centuries that we call the scientific revolution, and we resent the power of science. And that's why at the end of the 20th century all these people go around denouncing it. They use it. They denounce science on cellular telephones. I find it infuriating. They're 93 years old and they have been preserved by medical technology. They would have died 50 years before, and they complain about science at 93. We don't like to be that dependent, and we don't like to recognize the power that is there, but we're all the product of it. I mean, when Judaism began, and if we view Judaism as the historic culture of the Jewish people, when Judaism began 3,000 years ago, well, I'll describe the environment. Desert. Not Arizona. Desert. Sheep, goats, and donkeys. The camel hadn't even arrived. Sheep, goats, and donkeys, and they lived on top of you. The energy that was available to you, there were no switches, was sheep energy, donkey energy, goat energy, and human energy. All schlepping, all pulling, all lifting. That was it. It was a world called the family compound. Everybody talks about family values. I mean, they're all squeezed together on top of each other in the family compound. It was the world of scarcity, where every day was a struggle for mere survival. It was a world of barter, in which money was almost absent. It was a sort of, beginning with weights of silver and gold. And it was a world in which almost nothing seemed to change, where what you learned from your papa and your zeta, whatever you called him, it was still good. Now that's the world in which the Torah emerged. Every piece of literature, every ideology is a function of its environment. You don't get secular or religious humanists jumping up in the midst of this tent culture, because the philosophy was irrelevant. In environments of scarcity, it's like a historical principle. In environments of scarcity, what you get, it's interesting, the poorer people get, the more religious they become. No doubt about it. What other avenue of support do you have if you don't have some kind of magical power to sustain you? So now we're in an entirely different environment. One of the reasons why we can't really understand the Torah and other documents and whatever, we can't understand them because we look at them from the perspective of a culture which has nothing at all to do with the situation and the circumstances in which this literature arose. It's like incomprehensible. We now live in the environment of big cities. We live in the environment of instant communication. You understand what travel was in the old tent culture? I mean, 30 miles was 2 days. Instant communication. Do you have a friend in Zanzibar? I mean, you instantly, immediately, contact. We live in a world in which, because we now are in what we call a sophisticated, capitalistic, industrial, technological culture, we live in a world of mixing. Most of the people doing the repairs here, they came into my room yesterday to do the TV. Did they come into your room? Speak Spanish. I mean, we now are in a world in which people are coming from all over the world, and they end up what? In one place, all dumping one on top of another. We are in an extraordinary world in which we live in a global village. Not only is there instant communication, but we have products available to us, what? From all over the world. We live in a world of mechanization, a world of machines, of slaves that do not talk back except when they break down. We have mechanized most heavy work. And now we're heading into the age, if you will, of automation. I mean, at the end of the 20th century, the beginning of the 21st, the culture in which we live has almost no relationship to where much of Jewish culture evolved. So we look back at this literature, we look back at these times, and we try to understand them. It's very, very difficult. It's like when I try to explain, I grew up, and I hesitate to give my age, although I was born in 1928, sorry. I grew up in the age of radio. When I try to explain to young people what it means to grow up in the age of radio, I mean, and for my parents, they're BR, they're what? They're before radio. They can't even comprehend, they can't understand. What does it mean not to have a screen? Of course you live with screens. Screen to me was you kept flies up. You put screens up. The screen. Now, humanistic Judaism is not a response to the tent culture. And in fact, if we were still in that culture, there would be no humanistic Judaism. And in fact, if a humanistic Jew did exist and jumped up and said it, he would be killed. Because that culture can't tolerate that kind of ideology. We are a response to a dramatic and revolutionary change in human and Jewish existence. And in fact, all the major Judaisms are responses to major traumas in Jewish history. Prophetic Judaism. Prophetic Judaism is the beginning of what we call the movement to turn Yahweh, the God of the Jews, into the one God of the whole world. Well, that's a response to a major trauma that happened to the Jews. The Assyrians came from the northeast, and they came down and they jumped on Israel, and they jumped on Judah and the whole thing, and now the Jews had to deal with the trauma, and out of the trauma came an answer that their God was not weak, but that their God was so strong he had brought the enemy to come and punish them. And out of that emerged prophetic Judaism. Priestly Judaism, which followed prophetic Judaism, something that emerged around 500 BC, was a response to the destruction of what? The state of Judah. We call it the destruction of the Temple of Solomon, the bringing down of the royal house of David, and what it now produced was government by priests. It's called theocracy. A whole new culture now emerges. And the great book of that culture, which ultimately was to become the defining book of Jews who call themselves traditional, is the Torah, which ultimately places supreme power into the hands of the deputies of God, who are the priests. And then Rabbinic Judaism, which has been around for, 2,000 years. Rabbinic Judaism was a response to one of the most traumatic events in Jewish history. It was ultimately the destruction of the Second Temple, the coming of the Romans, the conquest of Judea, the development, if you will, of the diaspora, Judaism without the temple. And that produced the rule of the rabbis, and Rabbinic Judaism remained all-powerful in Jewish life until the 19th century. So Humanistic Judaism is to some degree the beginning of the awareness, that's what it is, in Jewish life that some fundamental, overwhelming change has taken place. And we don't like change. And when change is too traumatic, we are given something psychologically, it works in our brain, called, nobody in this room practices it, so don't feel uncomfortable. It's called denial. It's a strategy for survival. It shuts out what? If we had to be aware of all the change in our life, all the change we were experiencing, all the change we were about to experience, we would go mad. So we have this strategy. It's like a mental, brain strategy. It's called, it looks like change, but it isn't. Now, all of that's been reinforced by the events that occurred to the Jewish people in the 20th century, which Humanistic Judaism is also a response to. One of the things that emerged already at the end of the 19th century in response to this incredible scientific, industrial, urban revolution, it was a way that masses of people coped with the change. They couldn't figure out what had hit them, what drove them from the farms into the cities, what put them in this vulnerable position called unemployment. They couldn't figure it out. And out of it came an idea. It's called anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is not only the product of medieval Christianity. Anti-Semitism is also the product of the inability of people to cope with the trauma of the Industrial Revolution. Who's responsible for money? My enemy. Who's responsible for unemployment? And now comes a very simple answer, right? It's called the Jews. And now nobody's interested in the religion of the Jews. They're only interested in the power, the economic power of the Jews. And out of that comes this movement that ultimately ends in the greatest disaster in Jewish history. It's called the Holocaust. 1/3 of the Jewish people is killed, and in fact, Humanistic Judaism is also a response to the consequences of the revolution. Another part of the revolution was the emancipation of the Jew. I mean, after all, one of the strategies of Jewish survival historically, certainly in the diaspora, was segregation. There's no doubt that segregation is an effective strategy for survival. If you keep people locked up either voluntarily or involuntarily, you have what? It's a strategy for group survival. Is it a strategy for individual happiness? No, but is it a strategy for group survival? It was. It's a strategy for group survival. It works. And now it ends. And now Jews go forth and begin mixing. And now every Jewish person wants to have his cake and eat it. He wants all the advantages of mixing and what? And intense group survival simultaneously. That's what he wants. Why not? If you can have your cake and eat it, then what? Why not take it? And that, of course, is one of the things that Humanistic Judaism is responding to, too. And the third thing, and overwhelmingly important, was that by virtue of all these traumas, almost 1/2 of the Jewish people of the world end up at the end of the 20th century in North America. Now, at the beginning of the 20th century, most of the Jews of the world lived in authoritarian regimes. There is no history of democracy in the Semitic world, in the Jewish world. Democracy is a function of events that occurred in Western Europe somewhere in the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, and it mainly was centered in a place like England, which ultimately came to North America. By coming to North America, we were suddenly exposed to a political environment that was overwhelmingly different from any we had experienced, and almost everybody in this room is the product of that environment. We no longer believe that either the priests or the rabbis have the right to rule our lives. And most Jews in this country, even if they are conservative or reform, Reconstructionists or modern Orthodox, don't believe it anymore. They are the products of America, of what we call the democratic environment of America. So, out of it came a message appropriate to this experience. What is Judaism? Judaism, as we say, is the historic culture of the civilization of the Jewish people. Judaism incorporates many ideologies. What is the continuing link in Judaism? Is it a book? The Torah? Well, the Torah comes out of one of the eras. I mean, first you have what we would call Semitic Judaism, then you've got prophetic Judaism, and then you've got priestly Judaism, and out of that comes the Torah, and then there comes rabbinic Judaism, and so it keeps moving on. Now, the continuity is what Akkad Ha'am, one of the great ideologues for us, for humanistic Judaism. It's the Jewish people. The continuity is the what? What links all of them together is not a set of ideas. What links all of them together is a what? Is a people. And attached to that people is a culture, and that culture has accommodated through time, responding to each of the great traumatic events. It has accommodated what? Has responded with an ideology. And so out of that, of course, comes, it could only happen now, the definition of Judaism as the culture, the continuing link, as the culture of the Jewish people, the belief in a scientific age that indeed the what? The power lies within us, the belief in a democratic environment, that the ultimate goal, ethical goal, is the defense of the dignity of every human being, mine and yours. And the understanding that the only way you can function in this world, in which life is often unfair, and there's no magical power that we know of around that we can turn to, the understanding that ultimately we have to live this life courageously. But it flows from this experience. So now let's look at what the 21st century means. Got it? You got, I tell you, now what is the 21st century? Well, the 21st century is first and above all, and this word appeared, I think, in the 1960s. I think people had it before the 1960s, but it was not fashionable to use. And I'll say it slowly and quietly so I don't jangle your nerves. Stress. When you live in an environment of continuous change, so that when you buy your computer, it's already obsolete. Do you understand? It's stressful. When you live in that kind of environment, what happens is you become stressed. That's now the word. Toffler, 35 years ago, used the phrase future shock. You know, we're always in the state of trying to respond to this continuous assault of change, which makes this age different from almost any other age that preceded it. We live in a world of continuing intermarriage, in which people of different groups mixing in the same area that's part of the global economy and the global village continue to marry each other at increasing rates. Will it stop in the 21st century? It is continuing. One of the realities, obviously, therefore, for the Jews and other people, is that we now have large populations of people with multiple identities. You often ask a typical American, so what are you? I'm 1/4 Irish, 1/4 German, 1/4... That's what they say. So now you have people who are, you can't even use the phrase, it's not what we call politically correct. I'm going to use it and you'll forget I said it. Half Jewish. Not politically correct, but I was. You're half Jewish, you're half, I mean, you got multiple identities. You got a Bubba and Zeta on one side, and you got Grandma and Grandpapa, whatever it is, on the other side. And it isn't just a few people, they're running around everywhere. And in the 21st century, their numbers are what? I'm going to give you this environment, all right? Their numbers are going to increase. So one of the realities is that for Jews, certainly in North America and in the diaspora, there's something called rapid de-ethnicization, that large numbers of people who identify themselves as Jews or as partial Jews or whatever else it is, don't have what we would call the smell of gefilte fish and gehackte Lebanon. They don't have the names, the tastes, the flavors. They can show up for an event and somebody tells them about these quaint foods, which they know are related in some way to their past, but they don't feel them in their guts. The 21st century means that we live in a world of extraordinary diversity. A democratic, affluent culture allows people to choose different kinds of lifestyles. Most of these people would have been executed in the tent culture. They're called gays and lesbians. They're called singles who say, well, I don't think I'll get married right. Not get married. Or I'll get married and not have children. Or I'll get married and have only one. Please, give me a break. The diversity of lifestyles, I mean, are overwhelming. It's a world in which there is now what's called the leisure culture. So I want to talk about how you're dressed. It's not an insult. How many of you are wearing a suit? Raise your hand. The Industrial Revolution has now produced the reality that we can now devote a large part of our attention not to work, but to what? To leisure. Already in the 1920s, the style of clothing changed. Before the 19th century, people dressed for work, even with suits. You know, remember, even if you were a workman, you wore what? You would see them, the old photographs, they have what? They got suits. Now, on Wall Street, they're coming in jeans. It's sports culture. And now you come to shul and you invite somebody up to light a candle. They're wearing shorts. Do you understand what's happening? You know, for us who've lived through the whole 20th century, we have experienced this dramatic change. So leisure culture, you understand what it means? Well, leisure culture means, I mean Chicago. It's too cold. Cold. If you're working, cold, hot, doesn't make any difference. Cold means that's leisure. Leisure. Leisure is first, not work. Leisure means, well, cold, yes, if I'm near skiing. Hot, yes, if I'm near swimming. So now we have mobs of people heading, what, south. And I've always felt that the answer to the anti-Semitism was indeed the seizure by the Zionists of southern Florida. Would we have the present problem, only one border to defend across the peninsula? Surrounded by water on three sides, it would have been possible. Well, I don't want to go back on boo-boos that were made in Jewish history. It's a waste of time. It happened, it was an error. But they're all heading there. Where are the Jews out? The whole thing. Look at the census. I mean, the first information from the census of the year 2000 or 2000 has been released. I mean, the information is incredible. Close to 35% of the American people are now non-white. If you talk about the future of intermarriage, we'll talk about the future of intermarriage. Now non-white, it is predicted by the year 2025, the majority of the people in this country may be non-white. Asians, Hispanics, who are mainly the Chicano or Amerindian past, African Americans, whatever else it is. Most of the people in this country live in places like Deerfield or Birmingham, or Taylor, whatever the suburb be. They live in the suburbs. Do you understand what's happening? We took our morning walk this morning. I didn't know whether I was in St. Louis, Detroit. You understand? It was suburban architecture. I mean, where was I? Where were we walking? What parking lot were we? Were we crossing? That's most of the world, and part of the census indicates that the growing. Not only are California's already a majority non-white. Texas is on the way to becoming a majority non-white. There are two movements of populations happening in the United States. A whole group of people are coming up from Latin America. Mexicans, Colombians, Dominicans. And then a whole group of Anglos fleeing the weather are heading south, and they're bumping into each other, do you understand? Clash. But the South and the West, they're the areas of growth for what? That's where the Jews are moving. And one of the major Jewish thoroughfares in the world is not the road from Jaffa to Jerusalem on the pilgrimage. It's I-95. I regard it as... I drive up I-95. I rarely see a non-Jewish face. There are Jewish faces to the right. I mean, do you understand what's happening? The transformations that are occurring. What does it mean to live in the 21st century as we move from the 20th century? It's the options. I call it shopping center paralysis. When I used to be a child before World War II, I would walk into a store and I would say, I'd like some Rice Krispies. And up on the shelf, the grocer had Rice Krispies, Post Toasties, all brand, and I think it was one, give me another one. That was it. And already that was too much. 4 options, you get nervous. Now it's paralysis. The number of options you have at any given time, going to school, choosing a profession, taking a vacation, whatever, or just opening the New York Times and trying to figure out which play you're going to see. I mean, one of the great strengths of religion historically was that the only show in town was in church or in shul. And now it's what? One of 15,000 available options at any given time. So now you're competing with all the what? The other things. And sometimes when I have services, I'd like to go too to see. I want to go too. Now, this world is, a world of relentless change. I just want to tell you this. It's a world of absolute relentless change. So what I want to do to focus this is to say, well, I don't know what's going to happen 20 years. The rate of change is so great that who can predict what 20 years from now is going to be? In the age of the computers and the internet, we have to change our ideology. At one time we said there was no God, but maybe there will be. You ask this mind anything, and what? It has the information. So everything is what? Like open to revision. How do we as humanistic Jews move through this world of relentless change, this new world? God, how do we move? So I have a few suggestions. Suggestion number 1, or guideline number 1. But guideline may be politically incorrect, so I'll use suggestion. Suggestion number 1 is be a rational voice. So now let me try to illustrate what I mean. Very recently, and it's thanks to Joe Steinberg that I found out about it right away, a conservative rabbi by the name of Volpe in Los Angeles, California, gets up on Pesach, and announces to his congregation, there wasn't any Exodus. It's an illusion. Modern scholarship now indicates that there is no Exodus. There was no Exodus. Partic. So there was a little anxiety in the audience. What he was reporting was true. Most of reliable modern scholarship indeed points to the fact that the story of the Exodus from Egypt in the Bible or in the Torah most likely never took place. Carlton Barney. What a lead. And then it was picked up by the Los Angeles Times. It ends up on the front page of the Los Angeles Times. It makes the New York Times. It makes the national press. It makes the world press. It makes all of the Jewish press. And the whole thing is this explosion. Now, all he was saying was what scholars for dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of years have said. But who reads those scholarly journals? And even if you do, and you're a rabbi, why would you traumatize your congregation with the information? This is going to happen many times in the 21st century. There are going to be lots of new revelations. that would be very traumatic. And what we can choose to do is what people in the Reform and Conservative and other movements chose to do. Ignore the information because they knew that what? The information would give people a hard no. No, it would disturb them and discombobulate them, whatever else it is. But one of the principles, and that's how we have to move through the 21st century, one of the principles of humanistic Judaism is, when I say rational doesn't mean logic. Rational means we respect evidence. Where evidence is overwhelming or where evidence is confirming. We don't say, well, it doesn't suit me. So, I mean, this man called Dennis Prager, who lives in California, came out with this denunciatory article. He says, well, what happens to the Jewish people and to Judaism if there was no Exodus? It's like denying the Creator. Meaning, it's unacceptable. We will not accept the truth, even because it is what? Subversive. What kind of an attitude is that? Our attitude has to be, and sometimes it'll be very traumatic. But what does it mean to write a Haggadah if the Exodus never happened? Do you see the test? Okay. Our attitude is not, well, it's unpleasant news, and then this little thing called denial turns on, and what? We forget about it, and then we live this dichotomous life. We say, well, if there's the evidence, then we have to what? We have to respect it. That's our self-esteem. That's what it means to be a humanistic Jew. There's a new issue of Newsweek. It has the word G-O-D on the cover. And there is a new field of science called neurotheology. Did I make it up? What's neurotheology is an attempt to understand the operation of the brain when people are having what they call religious or spiritual experiences. To indeed bring science into the thing. So there's this scientist who for the last 10 to 12 years, James Austin, has been doing all this research. And he has found out some fantastically interesting things about the experience that people call spiritual or religious, or where they hear voices or have visions. What they found, obviously, was that what's often called the spiritual, the transcendence experience, where people feel all boundaries vanish and they merge with the world, generally is because there is a removal of neuronal stimulation up in this parietal lobe at the top of the head. The ritualistic chanting often of words or focusing on words or mantras, whatever, influences the hippocampus, which is in the brain, and ultimately it triggers the removal of neuronal stimulation, and that's the part of the brain that enables you to, and you need it for survival, enables you to figure out space, defines your boundaries and the boundaries of other things and the distances between them, and if you can't figure that out, you will what? Die. And therefore the parietal lobe is part of what we call the rational function in life, where we perceive dangers and then we learn how to defend ourselves and to respond to them. What happens is, when that stimulation disappears, you lose all sense of being alert, facing danger. The sense of boundary between you and other objects begins to disappear, and you have this experience of what? Having no boundaries. Oh. Does that wreck the spiritual experience? No. It simply means that the spiritual experience does not occur because there's some force out there that's entering into your mind. It's a function of the brain. And in fact, it can be quite relaxing, because if you're not confronting danger, if your brain isn't in the position of where you're confronting danger, then you begin to what? relax, and what? It provides a greater level of serenity. All of that. And I mean, this information is so fascinating. So what do we say? So we say, well, I don't like it. Well, you don't like it. It's there, do you understand? There's evidence that that's it. No, I want to believe that somehow or other I am merging with the universe. You're not merging with the universe, you are losing a sense of your what? Of your boundaries. Can it be good for you? Relaxing? Yes. All right. Second, be authentic. The fastest growing Jewish movement religiously in this country is Reform. The conservative movement is declining. It was at one time the largest movement. It is now on the decline. Reform is increasing. Why is it increasing? Well, it's increasing because of the arrival of another group. The other group that now, by the way, has taken control to some degree of publicity about what Jewish life is called the ultra-Orthodox. Most of the articles written about Jewish life today focus on ultra-Orthodox life. Reform Jews aren't interested. They don't contact the rabbi from Temple Emmanuel anymore. They contact the what? The Lubavitcher Center. Ultra-Orthodoxy is a response to an intolerable change in the modern world. It's a way of freezing things, and in fact, there it is, and it's a strategy that will be there for what? A long, long time, and is dividing the Jewish people. So now the standard for what is Jewish is determined by ultra-Orthodox. Well, but what if you're basically secularized, you don't want to live an ultra-Orthodox life? Well, what you now do is you get what's called the taste of Orthodoxy. The taste of Orthodoxy lasts for an hour or two every so often. So now when you visit a Reformed temple, it's no longer what? Protestant hymns. Now they do what? All kinds of things, Hasidic, etc. They're all put together in a potpourri that won't last for more than 85 minutes. So it's the taste of Orthodoxy without the penalties. And in fact, the Reform movement has become what? Overwhelmingly more traditional. But the penalty it has to pay is it's not in charge. The people in charge are the ultra-Orthodox who now call the tune. What you're doing is giving them a taste of what they, the authentic Jew, now provides. Now, as we go through the 21st century, these chronic protesters are going to be around. The fundamentals are going to be around in large numbers. They can't stand the change. Can't handle it. They're not going away. They're not fading away. And so the question we have to ask is, do we, like Reform, allow them to become our masters? So we say, oh, we've got to do things traditionally. Or do we make tradition not our master, but our servant? We may choose to do something traditional. We may choose to use the Torah. We may choose to chant or sing an old song or use an old formula. That's our choice. Or we may choose to read the poetry of Yehuda Amichai. The question for us as we go through the 21st century is not to fall into what I call the era of Reform. The era of Reform is now what? They've lost control of the process. We always have to remain in control of the process. Number 3, be embracing. If you're going to be in the 21st century, you can't say, well, we'll only have traditional families where there's a papa, a mama, and and children. By the way, 56% of the American people are married, but only 1/2 of them are in what we call conventional or traditional marriages. We now have a world of gays and lesbians, right? Do they have a place in our communities? Are they welcome? Are they accepted? The whole thing. Are there people who have chosen to live without the institution of formal marriage, whatever it is? Are they part of our world? The answer is yes. We now have, because of science, we now have this incredible number of people living over 65. I'm one of them. Who are in a new chapter in their life. Do we welcome them, embrace them? Maybe one of the things our movement needs to investigate, which I think would be very important, is to get into the whole world of elder hostels, in which the subjects of Humanistic Judaism, where people could come to events. This is what, we're always talking about getting the young people, fine. But you also need senior, what's wrong with my group? You also need, what kind of programming? We have to do imaginative programming. We can't simply, well, they exist to support young people. What's our program? How do we respond to that? That's going to be part of the 21st century. How are you going to fill up the time? In 20 years, there are going to be 800,000 people, or 25 years, 800,000 people who are over 100 years old in this country. You'll be embarrassed not to make 100.
You're planted.
What does it mean? Well, it means certainly that we have to be, in this very competitive world, imaginative. So now let me talk about a phenomenon. When religion first began, and they had religious services, they mainly consisted of music, some dance. In fact, it's early religious ceremony was sort of empty. You got up, you danced around the fire. They gave you a mask. And then came the Protestants. And the Protestants invented a new kind of service, which is called scolding and lecturing. The Word of God, and now at the heart of every religious celebration. No more music, a little bit. No dancing for sure. Ooh. Lecturing. And in fact, that Protestant model, which turned into the sermon, now was picked up by the Reform movement in the 19th century and became the center of Jewish, the sermon, and attached to the sermon now came the conservative movement. They wanted rabbis who could give what? Sermons, and they wanted Orthodox ones who could give sermons. And then the intellectual world picked it up. So ultimately, Jews in particular, who ceased to be religious, all went to lectures. Is there any history, of going to lectures? Like you're in Jerusalem in 4 BC, and then they went to lecture? This is a whole new thing. Well, the point is, and what we've discovered is, that certainly for people under 40, in this world of incredible options, they want something else. The fastest growing synagogue in New York City sings. It's B'nai Yeshua. They sing. 3/4 of the people who go there don't even believe in what they're singing. They want to what? They want to sing, and they want great musicians. People who can lead songs, they want to sing. Well, and in fact, many of these people choose, instead of going to services, they go to the theater. Well, theater used to be, that's how theater rose in the what? In the Greek world, it was what? It was part of a religious ceremony. If we go through the 21st century, if we only focus on lectures, we're not going to be able to recruit people. For people under 40, you can see them sitting in the car. No, you can see them. Sometimes I think I should be doing that. I feel totally left out. They're swinging to the what? to the music. And what could be more Jewish than theater? We're going to have to, rearrange our formats because, quite frankly, given all the options that are available to people, you can't simply, but at one time the best show in town was the sermon given by the Protestant minister, do you understand, in the village. I mean, that was the entertainment. People went there, even if they were scolded, it was the only show in town. One of the things we have to do is to be interesting. Let me tell you how not to be interesting. There's an obsessive question in Jewish life, and I'll give it to you. And if it depresses you, I'm sorry, or if it excites you, great. What have you done lately for Jewish survival? It's the eternal question. I get it all the way. So you're having this program and you're discussing who knows what, Omar Khayyam. What does that have to do with Jewish survival? Well, he was a good poet. I just thought we might discuss it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring this up. I won't do it again. And his name wasn't Omar Khayyam, it was Omar Khayyam. So what comes is this fear. Now, if we go through the 21st century, we will never recruit people if our only question is, what have you done lately for Jewish survival? The way to arrange for Jewish survival is to stop talking about it so much. The way to do it, obviously, is to do interesting things, maybe respond to real issues that people who are Jews share with the rest of the world. Did I talk about a country that is turning into a non-white country? What does Humanistic Judaism have to say about racial harmony? I mean, what are we doing about it? What does Humanistic Judaism have to say about genetics? Already we're going to have the possibility to what? To design future life. What is our response? What are the interesting questions? Well, those aren't uniquely Jewish questions. But they're questions that people are what? How do we respond to them? Certainly one of the ways that we have to respond in the 21st century is to be flexible. During the 20th century, there arose what we call a Center for Jewish Life, which was the State of Israel, and we as secular, humanistic Jews, whatever label you want to use, we came to believe that Israel was especially important to us because it was controlled by secular Jews. Remember that? The kibbutz movement and who knows what. Well, in the 21st century, there's going to be a new Israel. And the new Israel isn't going to be controlled by secularists anymore. There will be many secularists, but it's not going to be controlled by them. The kibbutz movement is now what? Failing and collapsing, and now the power of the Orthodox is rising. So, and beside that, in a global village, thousands and hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the 21st century are going to leave Israel to go do their business in Silicon Valley or who knows where. There's a huge Israeli diaspora. The reality of Jewish life is, and maybe Shimon Dubnoff, a great historian in the 19th century, was right. The Jewish people is a vanguard. By developing its diaspora, it ultimately what? Led the way as to where other people in the world are going to what? End up dispersed. And therefore our question, the big question of the 21st century is not how we can suck out as much culture only from Israel, but what can we, as part of this diaspora, do you understand, this international people of which Israel is a part, how can we develop strategies for dealing and for coping with this? Two more. One, Let's be complete. Rabbi Older brought up last night the idea of a camp. We've been talking about a camp now for at least 25 years. Our problem is very small. It's called money. It's a great idea, and if there's anybody in this room right now, you can stand up right in the middle of my talk. I do not. And if you wish to pledge money for a camp, we want money for the camp. But my feeling is that we need more than a camp. What we need, which may be either less expensive or whatever, and most interesting groups have them. If you want to have a sense of what Humanistic Judaism is, you have to take at least a weekend or maybe a week. And you go off to a place where you have what? 100% exposure for a period of time to what it is to live as a humanistic Jew. And you meet other people. You want to call it a retreat center, well, the word retreat most likely is not humanistic, call it a forward center. Whatever you want to call it, I don't care, but I mean, if we had that, and we could invite people from all over North America, and if you want to attach a few camp activities on the outside and the periphery to it, I mean, that would be for us a place to recruit and train people, and indeed might, in some respects, be easier initially to arrange than the other. And last, let's be a movement. Now, what do I mean by a movement? When I was a child, in my neighborhood, there were a lot of Jewish socialists. And they would meet at a meeting, and the next week I discovered they had an argument, and now there were 3 socialist organizations. And ultimately, there were so many organizations they couldn't even remember what organization they belonged to. But that's because in America, what you develop is a high sense of individuality. This is what I think and what I feel, and if this group doesn't conform to everything I think and I feel, then I certainly am not going to stay around here. Although I want you to know that I embrace democracy, other people's opinions, and everything. You understand? But I'm leaving. In order to be a movement as we go through the 21st century, we're going to have all these individuals, this in an affluent, highly individualistic culture. Some people are going to say, I like the word religious. Welcome. I like the word secular. Welcome. I like both words. Welcome. We don't kick people out, do you understand? Because over simply, how shall we designate ourselves? We welcome what? We welcome the variety. We are a movement. We want to be a movement. We have parameters, certainly parameters, but what? They are wide parameters. I'm going to tell you, in the 21st century, with a high sense of individuality, where everybody's pursuing his or her self-esteem and what I think and what I believe and all of it, you're going to get a lot of differing opinions on labels and all of that. We've got to be big enough to what? Embrace them all. So I want to conclude by telling you about my first overseas trip. As a child, I used to pride myself. I used to tell my relatives that I did foreign travel. They lived in New York, and they never did any foreign travel. I used to go to Canada all the time. I crossed the Detroit River, and I was in Canada, and I was a foreign traveler. So, but my first trip was not to Europe. I was paid for by the U.S. Army. I was sent as a chaplain to Korea, and so I ended up in Asia, and after like 3 months, they give you something called an R&R, which is rest and recuperation. And rest and recuperation, the R&R for people in Korea was Japan. What of a high. So you'd land finally at Tachikawa, and you get the shuttle into Tokyo, and at that time it was 350 yen to the dollar, believe it or not. And the first time I went on my R&R, I decided I want to stay in a hotel. Most of it had been destroyed, but part of it still remained. It had been designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. It was one of the few buildings that survived in 1923, the Tokyo earthquake. It's called the Imperial Hotel. By the way, it's gone. Gone, gone, gone. They asked me. I mean, nobody that wanted to keep it was consulted. The real estate was too valuable. Gone. But I was in that building, and of course they always told you when you went, every day they would remind, this building's a fight. Why did it survive? Well, because it was on a moving base. It wasn't rigidly planted into the earth. It was sort of flexible and sort of moved, right? And so the other buildings were rigidly put in or flimsily constructed, and they all collapsed and fell. But the Imperial Hotel, because it rocked with the waves, what? Survived. Now, sometimes the earthquake is so terrible, the buildings can survive, and quite frankly, the revolution that's taken place over the last 3 centuries all over the world was so traumatic that almost the past can't really survive, the little chunks of it. So the question is, and the earthquake doesn't stop, it keeps shaking. The chain, doesn't it? The 21st century is shaking. What our movement has to be is the Imperial Hotel. We have to be firm enough so that what? We have principles. But we have to be open and flexible enough so that we can what? Ride with the waves. And I hope that's what we'll be in the 21st century. And thank you very, very much for your attention.